Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to speak today on this very important bill, C-22, around establishing the Canada Disability Benefit. I want to acknowledge the work of my NDP colleague, MP for Port Moody, Coquitlam, and others for their perseverance and in bringing the voices of those living with disabilities, as well as the tremendous amount of work led by those living with disabilities and many allies to Parliament. It is clear we need this government to act now and implement this much overdue benefit. Constituents in my riding of Nanaimo Ladysmith with disabilities and allies are asking for their voices to finally be heard. I ask my colleagues to consider what their lives would look like if they were living with a disability and as a result were legislated into poverty. I think of Jocelyn, a constituent from my riding who I've spoken about before in this chamber, who is struggling to keep food on the table for her and her children as a result of living with a disability. Jocelyn is a single parent of 2 young children, holds an education, work experience, and a drive to contribute and give back to her community. Unfortunately, Jocelyn was in multiple accidents, leaving her unable to work and relying on the minimal disability income provided to make ends meet. Jocelyn described to me the challenges she experiences in covering just the basic costs of living. Jocelyn was very clear that all she was hoping for is the certainty that her children would have food on the table and a place to call home. Housing and food are certainly not luxuries for her and her children. These are basic human rights. In the 2015 election, the Liberals ran on a platform of delivering equitable opportunities for those living with disabilities. We had a glimmer of hope before the most recent election called by the Liberals, followed by inaction. This promise could have been delivered within the last 7 years of this Liberal government, so those desperately waiting have the basics they need. Yet here we are, once again, with no action. Why are those living with disabilities being treated by this government as if their lives do not matter? Mr. Speaker, the impacts of this inaction, this complete disregard for fellow human lives, is evident across Canada. It is imperative that federal leadership is taken today to provide Canadians with disabilities the basic human rights they deserve. Instead, more and more Canadians are becoming homeless, relying on food banks, are getting sicker instead of better without access to the medications they need, and often left without the affordable and necessary adaptive equipment they need. A lack of federal leadership trickles down in many ways. People living with disabilities are being made to feel that their lives do not matter. I feel it important, Madam Speaker, to once again share the story of a constituent in my riding who described to me that he felt that he did not matter and that because of his disability, he felt his life was considered disposable and was being treated as such by this government. I know this constituent is not alone in his experience, hearing from more and more people living with disabilities that feel that they have little hope of things ever getting better for them and feeling frustrated by this government and needing action today. People living with disabilities continue to contribute to our communities in countless ways. I think of Anne, for example, another constituent in my riding of Nanaimo Ladysmith and also a friend who's living with disabilities. Anne was told by a job placement agency years ago that she should settle for sitting at home and watching daytime television. Despite this clearly misguided and uninformed recommendation, I met Anne when she returned to complete her post-secondary education at Vancouver Island University as a fellow student. With barriers removed for Anne's success, Anne thrived as a post-secondary student, graduated with distinction, continued on to finish her master's degree, and is now an author and a strong community advocate for those living with disabilities and their right to access barrier-free education, housing, and to participate fully in the community. Despite Anne's accomplishments, Anne continues to be bogged down by an unrealistic student loan with payments that are unrealistic within the minimal income that she receives. Madam Speaker, when we take a moment to step back, it becomes evident that ensuring that those with disabilities are at minimum living above the poverty line does not only benefit those living with disability like Anne and Jocelyn, it benefits Canadians as a whole. The symptoms of reacting to poverty costs us all. When people can't afford healthy, nutritious foods, we see increased costs to health care as just one example. The same applies when people can't afford the medications they need or a safe roof over their heads. We pay more as Canadians when we are reacting to the symptoms of poverty than if we prepare and respond proactively by providing the means for all to live with dignity and respect. If people have, at the very minimum, their basic needs met, including a place to call home, healthy food, enough money to pay their bills, everyone benefits. Those living with disabilities are not exempt. Poverty does not benefit anybody. Economists predict that poverty in Canada would be reduced by as much as 40% overall by eliminating disability poverty alone. Yet another resident in my riding, Kate, shared with me her experience living with disabilities, trying to make ends meet. In addition to living with Chiari malformation, a structural defect in the skull that causes part of the brain to push into the spinal canal, leading to symptoms such as severe headaches, numbness of the limbs, loss of muscle control, coordination issues, dizziness, and fainting, Kate suffers with early onset osteoarthritis, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and several food and environmental allergies. To make matters worse, she was also diagnosed with cancer. You would think that Kate has enough to deal with in her day-to-day. Instead, she has been legislated into poverty by this government because she is living with disabilities. Compounding Kate's serious health concerns, Kate has not eaten more than one single meal a day in nearly a year. One single meal. She skips breakfast and lunch so she can enjoy and afford one dinner a day. As a result, Kate has been prescribed by her doctor a list of supplements to counteract the malnutrition she is experiencing. Unfortunately, the supplements that Kate has been prescribed, she cannot purchase with the little funds she is forced to live off. With the increased cost of living, Kate's minimal income is stretched even thinner. Kate described adding a bag of frozen vegetables to her cart just recently, the same bag of vegetables she spent her few dollars on in the past, and crying with the realization that this same bag had increased in price from $4 to $5.29. How much more could Kate possibly cut back from only one meal a day? The reality Kate is facing, trying to make ends meet with a disability, are unfortunately all too common. Kate describes her experience of living in poverty, pointing out that poverty is relentless. It is a constant, nagging, oppressing force that never lets up. There is a saying that the true measure of any society can be found in how we treat its most vulnerable members. In a country as rich as ours, I am sad to say that this government gets a fail on how we treat those living with disabilities. Now, let me be clear. I have met some of the strongest people I know who are living with disabilities. The incredible strength I have seen exhibited despite being kicked down over and over again is formidable. People living with disabilities are contributing members of our communities with their own unique stories, talents, and skills. People living with disabilities have loved ones, hobbies, and goals they are working on just like all of us. Yet, because many are unable to contribute through financialized forms of labor, we treat those living with disabilities, as my constituent stated, as disposable. However, many people living with disabilities deserve what everyone deserves: basic human rights. Why must those living with disabilities have to fight so hard to be able to meet their most basic needs? The Liberal government has let Canadians living with disabilities down at a time when they need this government to step up most. Madam Speaker, thankfully there are ways we can move forward today to begin treating those with disabilities with the dignity and respect they deserve. With the support of my colleagues in this chamber today, we can move forward with a Canada Disability Benefit. If delivered with the best interest of those living with disabilities and in partnership with provinces and territories, those living with disabilities could once again have hope. To those of you who are expressing your concerns, who have been fighting for too long, I hear you and will promise you that I will do all I can to work alongside my NDP colleagues to push for this to be done in a timely manner and to finally start doing what is right. Thank you, Madam Speaker.